Good afternoon, everybody. I've officially started the recording, so we're going to welcome you to Storytelling for Agility and Resilience today. And I'm really excited because we have people from all over the United States here today. We have people from active mobility advocacy, social justice, the climate crisis, urban planners, students, you name it, they are here. And this is such a great group of people. I want to let everybody know that's an attendee today that we are going to leave space at the very end for you to connect and share emails with each other. So that space is going to be held open for you for about 20 minutes at the end. So don't worry if you see some interesting people that you'd like to reach out to, you're going to be able to send them an email and make that happen. So let's get started. If you're not familiar with us yet, here at Petal Love, we teach communications, storytelling, and media relations tools to help you create safer, friendlier streets and a healthier, more sustainable world. And we do that through these online webinars and courses and workshops even. And we also do coaching for individuals and organizations. I'm the founder, obviously, Melissa Ballmer, so here I am. And I'm here doing this work with my colleague, Jim Brown. Jim, raise your hand, say hello.
Hello.
He and I were both in communications with the California Bicycle Coalition at different times, so we were ships passing the night, but we became good friends. He most recently worked as the executive director for the Sacramento Area Bike Advocates, and of course, before that for Cal Bike. So, Jim, take it away and tell people, let's see. Oh, yes. First, I want to tell you, you're going to hear best if you use headphones or earbuds if you have them, just so that you can keep away from the distracting noise that might be there in the background and you can hear these great answers that everybody's going to give today. That's us. And now, Jim, will you tell us how you're going to handle the questions later on?
Sure. We'll handle questions at the end. We have about 10 minutes set aside at the end of the discussion. Please write your question anytime under the attendee chat tab on the upper left side of your screen, above where the names are. If your question is directed to a specific person, please include their name. I'll read the questions in the order received.
Fantastic. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about solution storytelling. And this is the phrase you've heard before, painting the picture of the world that you want to see visually, verbally, and experientially. And this is something that we in advocacy, whatever type of advocacy you're in, really needs to do a better job of. And the panelists that I chose to be with us today to talk about this exemplify it. Okay. They come at this from the national and now global level. That's Monica Garrison. They come at it from the regional level, which is Tafarai, Bayne with Los Angeles County, which is almost the size of a country or is the size of a country. And Renee Moore, that comes to it from the city level, from the Alexandria, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. areas. So I'm going to give a little bit of a preview about who our guests are today if you don't know them already. And Monica is a very talented freelance photographer and videographer from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who launched a little organization you might have heard of called Black Girls Do Bike. It was founded in just 2013, and it has a mission of growing and supporting a community of women of color to share their passion for cycling. They now have more than 90 clubs around the United States, the Virgin Islands, and England. Think about that, with thousands of women who have joined them. And Monica brings a really interesting visual style as a fabulous artist and also a marketing background. And you're gonna hear from her kind of savvy the way she creates events and products that is rare in our world. Tafarai Bayne is the chief strategist of CicLAvia Los Angeles, who I am sure you've heard of CicLAvia. It's the most successful, largest open street events in the country of the United States, and it's celebrating its 10th anniversary. And Tafarai is considered a leader in strategic planning and community organizing and has worked on development and urban planning issues for more than 15 years with an emphasis on the dynamics impacting working class communities. He's got extensive developmental experience and he served on the board of Strategic Actions, CicLAvia, before he started to work there as a staff member, and was appointed to the commission for the City of Los Angeles Transportation. And finally, we have Renee Moore, who's a transit specialist at the City of Alexandria in Alexandria, Virginia. And she has worked in the bike industry or bike advocacy for just 5 years. Think about that. She's gained experience working in outreach and Vision Zero, community organizing with the Washington Area Bike Association, and program manager at Bike Arlington before she just started in this new position. She's passionate about introducing underserved communities to Alexandria's resources to get them biking, walking, scooting, and using the water taxi and transit for more recreation and transportation. In addition to being a transit specialist, she was recently selected by Amsterdam-based organization Bikes to be the bike mayor for the DC region. So congratulations on that, Renee. That is so cool. She's also involved in working with the blind bicyclists, deaf bicyclists, bicyclists over 50, and African Americans who want a bike. So what I'm going to do today is ask 2 questions to each one of our panelists in turn. They're going to have about 2 minutes to give us their response. And then at the end of that, each one has an individual question focused on their particular expertise, and they're going to have about 5 minutes for that. And at the end, we're going to have time for you to gain greater clarity with your direct questions, as we talked about previously. So I'm going to switch this off here on the presentations so that we can better focus on our panelists. Okay, so here's my question for everybody. And whoever wants to jump in first can jump in first. What is the most important story you feel needs to be better told for active mobility advocacy, social justice, climate change, all of these different kinds of advocacy in order to grow and thrive on the macro and micro level? So you have about 2 minutes each to tell us your answers on that one. And does anybody want to jump in first and tell us what they think?
Yeah,
if you I'm going to name you.
So I think the story that needs to be told more is the story of people of color, people who are over 50, people who have some type of disability, people who are not athletically built. They're fluffy, fat, zoftig, whatever word you want to use for that. Because all of those people are using transportation as well. They're using bikes, and they may not be biking just to get fit. They may be biking because they just enjoy it or they don't have a car. They're using transit because it's easier. Maybe it's less expensive and it's budget friendly. They're biking and walking for those reasons. But I don't think we see enough of those images in marketing when it comes to that. We see a lot of young, typically white people who are very fit and in shape and athletic. And if you don't see yourself represented in any of these images, it feels like that type of or mode of transportation isn't for you. So I think we need to expand those stories, and we need to expand the story of what a commute is. We have a very narrow definition of commute, and it's going to work, but we don't think of commute as going to the library. It's going to my place of worship. I'm commuting to the grocery store. I'm commuting to pick up my kids. I'm commuting to school. And so if we tell those stories too, which are not being told, it's not just get off the highway from 7 to 9 to go to work, but can we tell the story of people who are biking throughout the day to do their daily errands and run their daily life using various modes of transit that aren't just driving in a car alone?
Beautiful. Thank you. And I want to just add here that if you haven't thought of this before, women especially need to see themselves, because women come from a place of I'm not included, I'm not invited, whereas men often think, yeah, sure, of course they mean me. Who wants to go next?
I can go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, my thoughts kind of paralleled her thoughts, so I thought it made sense for me to go next. and then of course I'm probably biased because this is what I focus on, but the same thing, people of color, women of color. I think we're discovering, as people of color, they're discovering cycling at all ages and also all economic levels. So there are different things you have to focus on depending on who your audience is. And as we know, Black people are not a monolith. There are lots of different entry points to cycling for people of color. So you don't want to leave out those people who are cycling out of necessity. But then you also have a Black middle class who is cycling because, it's a hobby and it's enjoyable, and they are spending tons of dollars to look great on their bikes and to accessorize. So you have to take into account all those classes of people of color who are riding. And the same thing, I think people just basically desire to see themselves, and not to see a token version of themselves, but like organically represented and reflected in advertising, and all those things that surround cycling. So I think that's important. And ultimately, my focus is women of color, probably because they seem to be the most neglected and least uplifted group in our society. And I can, as a woman of color, can attest to that through personal experience. So I think they need to be reflected. And if they are reflected, then everything else kind of comes along with it. That you take care of the least of us, and then everyone else is taken care of.
Beautiful. And I want to share with the audience that 3 or 4 years ago, Monica was one of the people that I invited to be a storyteller at the Bike League's National Summit. And she was already kind of known, but they hadn't really seen her before. And when she got up and started talking and then shared how many clubs had started, it was really fun to see the league certified instructors in the front 2 rows that were the old guard, their jaw drop and just look at like, wow, this is somebody who is really walking the walk, talking the talk, walking the walk, and getting people on bikes in ways that maybe we hadn't thought of before. So it was one of my favorite moments ever. Tafarai.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. The two previous comments, I think, really hit the nail on the head for sure. So echoing that and building off of that, I think that another really important story right now is a story of, I think, at CicLAvia, a spirit we have, this idea of living and loving locally, and really lifting up like the spirit of local communities, the stories of local neighborhoods, connecting people to small businesses in their neighborhood, connecting people to the parks, the libraries, the churches, and connecting the how we, to the previous comment about changing the nature of commuting, like talking about the connections there and those trips and lifting up those kinds of stories, I think is a really important story moving forward. I think about there's a bike collective in Leimert Park in Los Angeles called Ride On Bike Collective. And during the pandemic, it's a Black-owned bike shop in Leimert Park. Native of Leimert Park run it. Folks know them. One of the owners used to teach capoeira classes at the dance studio next door. So it's a community institution in that way. And they've been sold out of bikes this whole pandemic. During COVID, they've been sold out of bikes, and their repairs have been through the roof in terms of people bringing their bikes in. So, and this the way that their story is tied to that community, and the way biking is tied to the nature of the culture of that community, I think, really speaks to the power of what it means to really out the active transit that links the neighborhoods and creating safer routes and passages for those kinds of trips, and the associated work. I mean, there's some policy work that's been created in Los Angeles around like slow streets, where we would close streets down for pedestrians and bicyclists. And I think that again speaks to this spirit of what does it mean to really heighten the connectivity of our neighborhoods, and really, people during the pandemic, people were forced to stay home. And I think it really forced people to think about the nature of their neighborhood, walk around the neighborhood more. I think we have to build on that spirit and really support that activity, because in looking forward, it's more sustainable, it's more pandemic proof. It's the kind of living that I think we have to start to really embrace. And a lot of communities do it already. You're really just reinforcing the patterns and activities of our folks already, just helping to make them safer and telling stories that lift them up in those experiences.
Tafarai, I want to have you add a little bit on this, because CicLAvia is doing something that really is very rare in active mobility and even any kind of advocacy, because advocates always think they need to be telling just their story. And a lot of times their story focuses on data. And what CicLAvia is doing on Twitter, and at the end I'm going to share everybody's link, is doing this remarkable job of painting the world they want to see through their storytelling, where they raise up heroes locally, regionally, statewide, nationally, and globally that are doing exactly what you're talking about. And really make this be one of your homework assignments for today, is to check them out on Twitter and look at the number of retweets that CicLAvia is getting. And final thoughts on that, Tafarai, about how that's helping you during this tough time?
Yeah, well, I mean, CicLAvia is inspired by a story from another country, right? We're from, we're inspired by Bogota, Colombia's CicLAvia, and the stories of that experience inspired our project in Los Angeles. So we've always taken and learned from the global experience and experience in other communities that mirror ours. And I think that's just reflected in our current practice, right? We know that there's lessons to be learned from our sisters and brothers in other states, in other countries, and in other states. And we also want to add to that conversation, right? So that's part of the nature of social media, is being able to both add to a convo and lift up a convo. And I think that's part of, we believe in that power. This is a global conversation we're having. We believe in the global village, and I think that we're just lifting up some of the stories of Los Angeles. We're really focused on that. We're of LA, so we're still telling LA's story in that chorus. And I think that's really at the heart of it, is knowing who we are, knowing our city, and knowing our communities, lifting up the stories there, and it's finding the mirror of that around the world to help lifting up this global story.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I'm going to go on to our next question. So what aspect of storytelling most excites you right now that you feel advocates, planners, cities, etc., need to be embracing more, and that you're either delving into more right now or you will be soon? So it could be videography, it could be online events because you can't do in-person events. It could be any kind of thing that you want, kind of storytelling. But what aspect of it are you most excited about, and do you think that advocates most really need to be getting into right now? Who wants to go first?
I'll tackle that one. So you brought up online events, and I can tell you that Black Girls Do Bike had our most successful virtual ride this year, which was unexpected. I kind of undershot expectations because, nobody really knows what's going to happen right now. And so, we had money that we raised for a good cause, which I think motivated people. We fashioned the event with a goal in mind, so that it wasn't just, oh, let me ride my bike. You picked a mileage goal and you participated. And then it was worldwide. So we invited people from all over the world to participate. And it was extremely successful. But beyond that, I personally have focused in on what I've called our Bike Girl Magic series, which is a play on words off of Black Girl Magic, because it's, not just for Black girls, but it's that feeling like when you see a woman on a bike and you go, yeah, good for you. I get that feeling. I imagine lots of people do. And so Bike Girl Magic is just highlighting the stories of those women who ride unapologetically. That's how we caption it. And that can be anybody. That could be, someone who's at the top of their game as an athlete, but that could also be the mother who decided that she's going to ride her kids to school every day on a bike. So in my mind, that's any woman who gets on a bike and takes on the power of that action. And then, having her in her own words explain how she came to love riding the bike and what it does for her psyche and how it improves her life on a daily basis. And we've told several stories so far, and I have a plan to tell several stories more over the next course of a year and a half, and just kind of highlight these women. And then I'm cataloging all these stories on our YouTube channel, so it will be there for for eternity, for folks to look at and be inspired by. And it's funny, I credit Melissa because a few years ago we had a conversation and you were like, you need a story, right? Black Girls Who Bike will really take off once you create a story around how it was founded and how you came to this point where you're inspiring all these women. And I realized in that moment that I did need to, tell my story to the world, because I was perfectly content being on the back end and not really showing my face if I didn't have to, and just letting this thing flourish and become whatever it was. But you were right. As soon as I, attached the story to Black Girls Who Bike, then we took off even more. And in that process, I realized the power of storytelling. And so I find that it's my goal now to highlight other women and tell their stories and let those stories, exponentially grow and grow our community and ultimately the larger cycling community. So that's what I'm excited about.
That was fabulous. I have to tell everybody that, basically, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, I called her out of the blue. Like, I sent her an email and I called her and I said, I'm really excited. I just read about you in Bicycling Magazine, but where are you? Like, I'm this crazy media relations person from California, and you're like really exciting, and I love what you do, but there's no you. Like, who is Monica? And there's no media room so that the media can find you. I have to tell everybody this story because within 48 hours, Monica had put up a media room with everything that I had asked her to include. And so what I want to put a pin in for everybody is, if you're looking to have a better media relations game, look at Monica. Black Girls Do Bike will share the resources and the links, and to everybody, both here and in the next follow-up email that we send to you. Check her out on Instagram, because this is where you can follow along and see how she's doing these stories. Because her brilliant photography inspired other people to raise their game when they sent in the photos. And also look at CicLAvia. CicLAvia has a fantastic media room where they share data in a way that you need to, with the small bite-sized chews that people can get their heads wrapped around. So that's a little bit of homework for everybody today. Okay, who wants to go next on what aspect of storytelling most excites you right now?
I'll go.
Okay.
I think for me, one of the things that's exciting about it for planners and cities that I want to work on is actually just telling stories. I find that you said this earlier, is people who planners love data and research and surveys. I'm surveyed out. I'm researched to death. And the problem is, not that that's not important, but no one knows how to tell that in a way that's compelling. I think people think that when they find out that X percentage of people are doing something or not doing something, that when they put that in a pretty graph in PowerPoint, that people are going to suddenly go, oh, let me get on a bike. And no one does that. And so what I'm looking at doing now is doing more day in the life stories and more how-to things visually. One of the things I've noticed here in DC that tends to happen is it seems like this happens is that some company will come in with the dockless whatever, and the city knows about it and the company that doesn't knows about it, but then they drop 500 in the city and no one knows what to do with it. And they're parked everywhere. No one knows how to use them, or a few people do, but not everyone. They get vandalized. And I think if we did more how-tos, showing people how to use it, not just how to use the thing, but how to incorporate it into your life. And so one of the things that we're talking about doing is a how-to with our Capital Bike Share, and that you don't necessarily have to bike all the way to work. I think we've had this all or nothing mentality with biking. You either bike to work or you don't. And I'm looking at it and thinking, no, there are people who can take bike share to Metro, take the subway into work, and then bike the last part of it. And you're still biking. It's not that you're not biking. You're not biking the 30 miles. You're biking maybe 3 miles, and that's still getting you out of a car. So I think telling that story of how that can work for people, how they can incorporate walking into their lives, how they can incorporate transit into their day. If they have a meeting in the middle of the day, take bike share to that meeting instead of taking your car out of the garage to drive 5 blocks and then park it for another $15. Like telling those kind of stories can make a difference, I think, for people, because then people can start to think, I never thought about doing that. I never thought about taking bike share to do something, or taking a scooter to do this, or walking the 10 blocks to the meeting because I always just drive my car there. And if we tell more of those stories and how to do it, what equipment you might need, as people begin to bike back to work, telling the story of, how do I get my clothes to work? How do I get lunch to work? What happens if I get a flat tire? What happens when it rains? What about when it gets cold? Like answering all those questions in a visual way for people helps take the burden off of them trying to figure it out, and it makes it easier for them to make the decision to not be in a car.
Exactly. And those are short, like if they're videos, they're really short videos, right? Like
Yeah,
one of the things advocates love to do is like the 8 to 15 minute video, short video, and advertisers do the 30-second to maximum, right, 2-minute video. And
that's our attention span. No one's watching your 15-minute video on how to buy luggage for your bike. Like, just make that short and sweet.
I want to make sure everybody knows that Jim is doing a fantastic job of sharing the links to these things that we're talking about in the attendee chat. And again, we will circle back and share them with you in a follow-up email newsletter. But these are some important things. So Tafarai, same question.
Yeah. Again, previous speakers are hitting a lot of good points. I think the one thing, I'm always excited by things that both get at sort of our core mission and vision, and really hit at a community need and can provide a community service. Particularly right now during the pandemic, it's just like, and during this crisis, economic crisis, health crisis, like crisis. I watched the debate last night. Crisis. Like I just feel like everything we do has to serve the fundamental needs of our communities right now, even if it's a fun bike event, right? Like, and CicLAvia has always been about that. But being bigger than just this event, being about this impact. But I think in this moment, what has really been hidden for me is hyper local. And I talked about local earlier. I'm gonna say it again. Like, how are we really lifting up? Like, I think about how so many local newsrooms are gutted right now, and how a lot of local storytelling that's actually really important storytelling for political reasons and social development reasons isn't happening. You don't hear about the needs of residents on Main Street on the main commercial corridor in your neighborhood anymore. You don't know what's going on in your local city hall as much. And I think how we can do hyper local storytelling to lift up real stories like that. It's not just helping to highlight the small business in that neighborhood, but also lifting up the needs of all the businesses in that neighborhood, so that the local councilman can actually hear that and actually do something about that, or not, and people can vote accordingly. Like, there's a little bit to how these stories can build power for local communities as well, and really help to shift political dynamics, which relate back to the infrastructure that we can bike on and the streets that we can walk on. Like, these stories have to push those buttons. Otherwise, we're not creating a safer context for us to do what we want to do. Just be active out in the streets and be able to be in our neighborhood safely. And so, I think examples for CicLAvia coming up, we're going to be really focused on highlighting small businesses. Along all, we're not doing our major event right now. It's when this whole crisis hit us in the face, because it's like, we do these large, massive public gatherings. What's the one thing you can't do right now? Oh, massive, large public gatherings. So we've had to reprioritize our work in really big ways. But we know we've always been, we've kept our communications and our storytelling apparatus strong this whole time. And really specifically focused on providing services and needs to our people, our city. From testing information to financial funds and resources for people to get financial support right now, to encouraging mask wearing and making sure folks are thinking about being healthy outdoors, and how we're building confidence in people getting back outdoors safely. And so, again, I think that, all that, it kind of excites me, I'm weird. And then hyper local storytelling, I think, and lifting up the stories of small businesses, small local, your local community institutions, really highlighting the park connections. All of that stuff, I think, is what's going to be really important. And I think, is what's not going to be captured. And it's, just the last thing, I recently got cable. And the most exciting thing on my cable is our Spectrum News the local storytelling is excellent. Like, I see my friends on the news all the time because they're talking to residents about things that are happening right in the streets. Actually, I feel like that hyper local thing, that's going to be something that I think folks are going to be desperate for. And if we could provide that, we'll provide a service and, provide some great storytelling opportunities.
So I want to put a pin in that because Jim is going to be hosting the next webinar conversation like this in November about media and what's going on in this crazy time that we're in. And that it's one of those places where it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us in advocacy where you can actually become the news, right? So as a native Californian, I remember Spectrum, and in almost all areas, there's cable channels that would be desperate to have some stories from advocates, and also the local newspapers that are being cut down. It could be an op-ed. You could become a regular featured columnist. And so Jim's going to talk about all of this stuff in November. But thank you, Tafarai, because you're absolutely right. So next, I'm going to switch over to specific questions for each of the panelists, and you're going to have about 5 minutes so you can go more in depth with not only your thoughts about it, but what others can do to put these ideas into play. So Monica, we're going to start with you, and I'd like you to share with us how your school background in marketing and your passion for photography really shaped how you create the visual storytelling and outreach for Black Girls Do Bike. And you've got a real interesting thing because you also do products in a way that others don't do. And it's really, really gaining traction right now. And which platform is your strongest? And which platform do you really feel is key to growing your audience in the future? Have I asked too much at once?
So my degree is in no, that's okay. My degree is in business, so I definitely took some marketing classes along the way. And while I'm not an expert, I have a few basic, marketing concepts that I fall back on when I'm trying to come up with something simple and to the point, and that's going to be effective. I've always kind of appreciated good design, so and art, and so that that lives within me in everything I do in life. And because I have always been into photography and now videography, because that seems to be even more relevant than photography in a lot of ways. It's actually really like the perfect synergy when you take into account the amount of content that I have to put out to maintain Black Girls Do Bike and keep it relevant. I will say I'm kind of always focused on learning my audience and looking for changes in my audience because there are shifts. I've been at this for 7 years, so there are shifts in what people find important and what people want to focus on. I never really post just text. There's always some visual attached to it. So a picture, a long video, a short video. And almost before I post anything, I think, okay, who is this for? What's going to be the most effective way to reach them? And that determines, what I attach to the text. And because I'm a photography, I have a little bit of snobbery when it comes to images, because there are times when there's a semi-awesome image and a great meaning behind the text, and I won't post it because I don't want it to live forever on our Instagram feed, for instance. But I'll use it as a story, so it's one of those things that shows up for 24 hours and hits the audience and then goes away. But ultimately, it's fun for me to create things and gauge the reaction that people give to the things we post. And I'm always kind of making small tweaks to say, okay, this was effective, or this got our audience's attention. And I always say that the secret sauce is that I basically make what I want to see and what I want to engage with. You mentioned our products. almost every product in our shop is something that I would buy if it was an option for me. So I make things that I want to wear, and I create events that I want to participate in. The good news for me is my audience mirrors me in a lot of ways in terms of culture and sometimes age and background. So that works to my to the positive. But it seems to have been working this long. So it's one of those, if it isn't broke, don't fix it things. And then as far as the platform, social media is definitely tricky. The secret is picking kind of the right conduit that goes to the right audience, and not even just your current audience, but the audience you hope to reach. Because I know, for instance, one of our challenges is, for lack of a better word, is our demographic is pretty much ladies who are like 35 to 65. But I know there are a lot of 20-somethings on bikes that, women of color who aren't engaging with Black Girls Who Bike. And it kind of drives me a little crazy because I know they're out there, but maybe because I'm making what I want at age 40, that I'm not appealing to those 20-somethings. So I'm always looking for, like, how do we get these women engaged? It's probably because they're not on Facebook, and that's the other thing we have to talk about. But Facebook is probably our strongest entity as far as social media is concerned. It's really unparalleled in its ability to, cast this broad net and organize people and manage events, because Facebook has all that built into it. But it's also unpredictable in terms of, is it sending the content to the right people at the right time? Do they see it? So I worry about Facebook, and Instagram is great for visual storytelling, because it's just putting it in your face. And if the images are engaging enough, then that may lead people to look at the text. But Instagram isn't great for sharing links, and that's, the world goes around based on links these days, and it's not really good for organizing people and rides, at least I've found. So I don't think we're leaving Facebook anytime soon, or Instagram, because they both have strengths. Twitter is a whole nother beast. I try to avoid Twitter as much as possible, but I think what I've focused on, and as I talked about earlier, is YouTube. And YouTube is this weird cross between social media and search engine. And if you've done your research, you will know that it may have surpassed, but I think Google's number one and YouTube is a number two search engine in the world right now. So when people want to know, how do I fix a flat tire or anything, they go to YouTube and search and try to find an answer. So I think there's some power there, especially if you're a storyteller. What better way than to have a platform that allows you to tell short form, long form. You can tailor it to your audience. You can create playlists that are specific to what people are looking for. So that's great. And I like it because it kind of legitimizes Black Girls Do Bike, and it gives us a way to show our perspective and our story. So instead of letting other people tell our story, we get to tell our own story on YouTube. And if you're interested in, delving deeper into what we are and how we do it, then you can find it on YouTube. And ultimately, we can post education videos there. We can highlight cycling events that we attend. So it can be a shapeshifter in a way that you could make it anything you want it to be. It's very versatile, and it's an archive, a long-term archive of, the history of the organization. That's what I hope to create with YouTube. So it serves a very specific purpose, but I think it's a very powerful tool.
Fantastic. The pin I want to put on that is measurability. So if you've listened to her, you realize that she's really paying attention to each one of these social media platforms and what they're able to do, and tweaking as she goes along. Storytelling as a strategy isn't airy-fairy. You're actually able to figure out what's working best for you so you can do more of it. So Tafarai, here's your specific question. So we talked about CicLAvia being a really wonderful resource of storytelling for local, regional, and even worldwide. And you talked a lot about hyper local. But it wasn't, I've been a student of CicLAvia for a long time, since even before you worked there. Storytelling was not always central to your strategy. Can you talk about that shift? Because it's really been fascinating to watch unfold.
Sure. I mean, and I think I would counter slightly, right? Like I started working there. I attended the first event as a participant, and after that, I started working with them. And the first event, I think I got involved kind of because of storytelling from that first event. And I'll say because the team was really specific about the imagery they were using and what stories they were telling through that. And I remember opening up an LA Weekly, our regional little paper here, and seeing this big ad of one of an LA street with thousands of people in it on their bikes smiling. And that just was like, what? That doesn't happen in LA. Like so, I think that kind of, storytelling has always been part of the ethos. Now, it definitely has evolved for sure. And, to your point taken, for sure. It's evolved a lot. It's evolved. And I think the main way it's evolved is we evolved as an organization on some levels. Our first events, we didn't know if we were going to have second events or third events for a while. So there was definitely this growing up piece. As we become an organization, I think it's become clear that we wanted to really, sort of harness our impact more. We're at this last year, we would have had 6 events, and we were looking at 6 events every year. And the mayor is asking us to go monthly. So now that we have this future sense of like, this organization is going to be here, and this has been for the last few years, we've been operating more in this sense. I think that's when our storytelling, again, we're inspired. I think we're inspired by stories. We were inspired by a global story. So I think, I'm trying to answer your question. I think that. Give me what's your question exactly one more time?
Well, I guess so. Okay, so and I wanted to let us know that we're getting great answers, but we're getting a little short on time. So, but I guess my thing was storytelling was always there because you're an event production company in the background. But I think the switch to telling the stories that I noticed mostly was on Twitter. So I'd seen the ads tell stories and things like that, but I didn't see the storytelling on Twitter, and that's what really intrigued me because Twitter is the social media platform to engage the media. So I guess that's why, for me as a media specialist, it's important.
And I think it does speak to our desire to want to, we've been operating with a vision of the world on some levels, sort of a vision of an equitable world, sustainable world, one where you could go around any neighborhood safely and sustainably, where economic opportunities exist, for everybody. And I think that vision has more infused our Twitter, our social media strategy, in the sense of us wanting to paint out like, well, what does that look like in some of the policy examples we're seeing in the world? What does that look like with some of the personal choices people are making? How do you fill in this picture and this vision we have? And I think we've never been a big soapbox kind of organization about our motivations in that way. Our events are about the activity, about through action. And so the stories of other people taking action on these kinds of things, are the kind of stories that we want to replicate. And I think that is definitely how we've shifted a lot of our storytelling. And, and it's been towards this goal of wanting to inspire and support, this vision of Los Angeles that we operate with, one where people can get around safely, have public transit options, have a small mom and pops that are healthy and sustainable, have job opportunities. I think it all ties back together.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So our next personal question is for Renee. So we've seen national and even global with Monica. We've seen regional and also global, but making it hyper local with Tafarai. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about personal storytelling, even more with Renee. So your question I want to ask you is, share with us how you use your own story of learning how to ride a bike as an adult as a way to engage a much broader audience, both in the active mobility conversation and in the events and things that you do that make people feel really welcome to try things new.
Sure. So I learned to ride when I was 25. Someone asked me out on a date, said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to learn how to ride a bike." I didn't even know, honestly, to this day, I don't even know if he knows how to ride a bike. My assumption was that if you were over 7 and you weren't me, you knew how to ride a bike. And so we went down to this area in DC called Georgetown, rented a bike, and in about an hour, he showed me how to ride a bike. And I loved it. I thought, this is so freeing and awesome. A year later, I ended up moving to Texas, and I rode some, mostly on trails. And because of of Oprah, I signed up to do a marathon, which I hated. And then the following year, I met somebody from Team in Training that they raise money for lymphoma and leukemia, and they convinced me to do a triathlon. And so I said, okay, I could try that, but to let you know, I didn't own a bike. I did not know how to swim, and I hate running. So that made total sense to me to sign up for this. So I signed up for it. I trained a lot. I enjoyed biking. That was the best part of the triathlon for me. They did teach me how to swim. I figured they would, because it would look bad if I drowned in the ocean. But the bike was my favorite part, and I always rode on trails. And so I ended up moving back to DC, my home, and I started a group here because I wanted to keep riding with people. And so I started a group called Sassy Sisters Cycling. I had no real intention for it except we're all going to ride. And so I was the type of rider who put her bike on the back of a car, rode to a trail, and then rode, 30 miles and came back, put my bike back on the car, and rode home. And I never once considered biking as transportation ever. That never dawned on me. So one of the members in my group said, hey, Black Women Bike DC was hosting a workshop and on winter biking and biking in the street, which I thought was completely stupid. Anybody from Black Women Bike will tell you I was really not happy being at that meeting that day. But we went on a ride using Capital Bike Share, and I thought, this is actually not bad. This is pretty cool. It's something I'd never done before, hadn't really thought about. And a few months went by, and my mom ended up having a stroke. And so I biked up to see her because the parking there was $22 a day. And I thought, that's crazy. I'll just bike. And it was about an 8-mile ride each way. It was therapeutic for me because I didn't know what was going to happen with my mom at that point. I knew she was going to need a lot of care. And I needed that space to kind of think through what was going to happen next. Was I going to have to sell my house? Or, what was I going to do to take care of her? So I needed that time, and I appreciated it. So I did that. But the other thing that happened is that I saw a lot of the city that I grew up in that I really never paid attention to because I was always in a car going through it. So I started another group called Bicycling in the City. And that group was designed to take people to events or to things happening in the city. And the way we would get there is by bike. So the first event I did was a paint and sip, and we biked there. We biked there, did our painting, bike back. I would do pizza crawls. I did, we would go to three different pizza locations. We did sweet treats ride where we would go and get ice cream in one place and cake and then cookies at someplace else. We did museums, movies, restaurants. I had a bike book club going until the pandemic, where every month I pick out books for like 6 months, and then we would bike to a restaurant or a library, and then we would discuss the book. So we did bike and kayak, bike and stand-up paddleboarding. So we did a lot of events, and my whole goal was to get people, one, to be on a bike, to see that you could use your bike for small trips. All of my trips are under 10 miles round trip. I try to keep them super flat. I want people to be able to bike in regular clothes and not feel like they have to buy a full kit to get on a bike. They can certainly do that. I definitely have people that do that. But I typically show up in a dress and sandals or dress and boots, and people will look around and go, where's the ride leader? And I'm like, it's me. As you saw, my bike has like flowers all over it. It is the girliest bike ever. The helmet is like Minnie Mouse, red and white polka dots. There's nothing about me that says I'm going to be fast. When you see me on a bike, you're probably like, I need to move out of the way because she probably is going to tip over. She probably doesn't know how to ride this bike. But I ride like that on purpose because I want people to see biking as accessible. I don't want people to feel like they have to have a ton of gear to get started. It starts a ton of conversations. I am always stopped when I'm on my bike by someone who's like, hey girl, you're out here biking in your heels and you're biking in a dress. One of my girlfriends calls me, she nicknamed me Kim Kardashian because she said no one gets pictures taken more than you do on your bike except Kim Kardashian. And people stop me and ask can they take pictures of me, which is super weird, but clearly I'm making some kind of statement when I'm out there, and that's what I want. So people join me because I think they know the rides are going to be fun. They're not going to be long. They're not going to get sweaty because I'm in a dress. And so they know I'm not going to be riding really fast, but we're going to do something that's really interesting. And because of that, I get a lot of new people out, a lot of people of different ages and ethnicities who wouldn't ride with another group of like a racing group, but they'll come and ride with me because they're going to go do something fun, and they know it won't be a super long ride.
Great. Thank you. I'm so glad you told that story. So now we're going to switch over, and I'm going to let Jim host the asking and answering of who wants to answer the questions. And we've got one question already lined up for you. So Jim, are you going to come back and take over on that?
Yes, thank you. We have a question. I think this is for Tafarai. I'll just read the question. CicLAvia has helped the slow streets movement growing in LA, and I see it accelerating across this country during the pandemic. Where should the scale lean when trying to balance personal storytelling with advocating for civic policies to engage an audience?
It's a great question. I think that's a great observation as well. We were very intentional about how our organization was communicating around the programs like Slow Streets early on in the pandemic. We were very sensitive to the fact that there was a lot of science unknown about the virus early on in the pandemic and how it was being spread, and we knew it was impacting Black folks and brown folks disproportionately. So we weren't heavily advocating publicly for we need to reopen, we need to get outside. We thought it was more responsible to have a measured tone about, you should be outdoors in your local neighborhood, walk around, get that air, but stay safe, wear your mask. And we weren't doing big policy advocating at that moment. We engaged. Some of our staff were directly engaged in conversations with the city around implementing and strategizing around Slow Streets. So we were very involved in the process. But we were mindful about our public tone and how our communication and storytelling could support health. And now I think that's the personal storytelling is critical for the expansion of programs like Slow Streets. I think political leaders need to hear about how residents need these programs, the impacts of speeding in their communities, the need for more recreational space, the need to be able to walk to local small businesses and get around their neighborhood safely. I think that storytelling is going to be critical in terms of getting these temporary policies turned to permanent policies, and the permanent policy and the actual implementation of these looking more and more like permanent infrastructure as opposed to just A-frames. And I've had some great examples of community organizations who advocated for slow streets in South Los Angeles and now want speed bumps because they're like, yeah, the slow streets is cool, but we want the speed bumps to really make sure these cars slow down on these streets. And now they're asking for speed bumps in their neighborhood and going about the political process and civic engagement necessary to get that stuff happening. I think that is the natural arc of this stuff. And I think that we need to be lifting those stories up and making sure that politicians are hearing them and knowing that their votes matter on this kind of stuff, and that they should be held accountable for it.
Fantastic.
Tafarai, I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that. Is how successful do you see this kind of personal storytelling being able to move the needle with public officials? And I ask this partly because Sacramento has really not responded to the opportunity to go slow streets, despite the example of Los Angeles and Oakland. And it's clear to me that there isn't enough of there aren't enough personal stories about why individuals want that. Do you have any examples of where that kind of storytelling has been helpful?
Yeah, I can talk specifically to the process in Los Angeles. The needle around the policy making around this in LA moved when neighborhood councils specifically started hitting up their council people and telling and encouraging, and bridging the storytelling about the need in their neighborhoods for these. And then this encouraged council people like Mike Bonin to go out and specifically ask for it and make sure that it became a legislative item. Now, I think the continual storytelling around it has led, another council person has asked to make it a permanent program now. And so, I get that, it's got to be coupled with data. What like the neighborhood council structure let them know that, oh, it's not just one story. There's this whole neighborhood council wants it. That's at least hundreds of people who relate to that. Like that scale of numbers definitely still matters, and some data around the broader kind of community engagement on the need for these things. But that's the face of that is the need of neighbors and residents, and the specific stories of folks' real concerns. And I think that still has to be the spearhead, if you will, of the conversation.
Thank you so much. This is a question for all of you. Have you been successful with engaging Black youth, and do you have any suggestions for outreach? And any of you can jump in.
Yeah, I can say no as a direct answer. We have not been successful with it, but it's one of those things that's kind of been on our back burner. The extent of our engagement with children is, we expect mothers to bring their kids along for Black Girls Do Bike rides. There are some legal things you have to take care of to make sure that, young people, especially when you're working with young people. I will say that we have a plan to do that. Part of our partnership with USA Cycling that we just solidified this year is to start engaging and having literal, classroom setting, pandemic pending, some events that will gear specifically to children. So it's something we're working on. It's on our radar, but we haven't quite nailed it yet.
Tafarai or Renee, anything to add?
I'm sort of like Monica, where I've done events with youth, but I wouldn't say I've been successful. Like it's been like widespread success. When I first got into bike advocacy, I was working with organization Bike Maryland, and so we used to teach bike safety skills to students in Baltimore City, which is mostly Black. So we did a lot of that, but we didn't take them out on rides and that kind of, we did one thing and then we'd leave it. We didn't really test if kids were riding. And then one year when I was working for Washington Bicyclists Association, I did an event where it was a big family event, which was the whole thing, which was the whole purpose of it, was to get different ethnicities and ages and groups of people out. And the people brought kids with that. We had the police department bring out bikes, and we were able to do that ride. But I wouldn't say, in general, I work with a lot of youth. I didn't. It wasn't part of the job either when I was there. So.
I can say real quick, I don't have much time, so I can say real quick, for some of the work we've done, our most successful engagement with Black youth and youth in general, Black youth in particular, though, is partnering with groups who did that work really directly, regularly, and through that partnership, creating programs and engagements that worked for the population, right? They would help us with design, and we create either like at some of our CicLAvia events, we have like specific art activations that were poetry led, had hip hop music, had the stuff that folks wanted, right? Like and created environments that made them welcome. And I think that partnership and ensuring that our gateway to that community, reflected that community, and resourcing that, paying those partners for some of that engagement and partnership sometimes when necessary and needed, and always welcome, for that, to be able to finance that kind of stuff. I think that was been a big part of successful engagements there, when we don't, because it's not like we regularly work with African American youth like as part of our program thing, and it's in any population, that question could be for any population. You should always make sure that you're working with folks who regularly maintain those relationships. If you as an organization don't.
So we have one more question, Jim, and I think actually this is for Tafarai to answer.
And then I'm going to point out we've got a couple of minutes left, so I want to respect everybody's time here and try to close this as much on schedule as we can. So the question is, with with all of the pollution and so forth that we're dealing with right now, it's a little hard to encourage people to exercise outside. But this questioner says, I'm appalled by the lack of effort to reduce car pollution when conditions are hazardous. Do you have any strategies around air quality?
It's a hard one for the Angelino to answer right now, since most of our air quality concerns are forest fire related, which is a climate concern. I think we're all looking at the climate challenge we're dealing with right now. It's ironic. The top of this pandemic, we had the cleanest air we've ever had, and so that was a beautiful period to be biking out and encouraging activity. I think we're all going to struggle with this, besides Green New Deals and other really clear climate policies that even LA has its own Green New Deal kind of framework. I think that that's a struggle we're all going to be tackling. But yeah, we still I still ride out. I ride out when the air is clean enough. Even if it's not as clean as I want it to be, for sure.
So we need to round up on that. I'm going to ask one final question of each of you in just a second, but I want to let everybody know that the upcoming webinar that Jim will actually be playing my role at is advocacy and the news media in the age of clickbait. And so that plays into some of the things that we talked about today. So the date and time will be coming to you through email newsletter, and we want you to be aware of that. And also, as everybody gives us their final thoughts here, I want to let you know that this is how you can get in touch with us. But again, we will share more information about how to be in touch with us in a follow-up email newsletter. And we will be asking you to answer a very short survey about how you enjoyed today and how we can make things better. So final thoughts. Can you guys give us a one-sentence brief, final thoughts that you want to end us out here with today? And I'm going to start with Renee. I'm going to go backwards.
Oh, jeez. I was thinking I'll go last. I would say if you want to get different people than you already have on bikes, do something fun that people who don't typically ride a bike would want to go do, and then put them on the bike to get there. Make it hard for them to drive there. Put them on a bike.
Fantastic.
I'll go next. I think I subscribe to the if you build it, they will come philosophy in life in general, and also when it comes to cycling things. So, find the people who are already doing the work and engage them and pick their brains and pay them for it. And the cyclists are out there. You just have to find ways to bring them in.
The pin I want to put on that is, because you've talked about this before and I didn't. It's the build it and they will come if you do a good job of telling the story, of showing themselves in the place doing that thing, right? And also the pay them. I'm a big proponent of paying people for their work rather than asking them to share it for free, and not frankly giving them very much credit, which advocates can be kind of bad about doing that. Final thoughts, Tafarai?
You kind of stole mine. I think people want to see themselves in this stuff, it's really lifting up people's stories. People want to see each other. They want to know the local owner of the local bakery. They want to know the local corner store. They already do know them. They would love to see them, I think really lifting up those stories of people and letting people see people. I think that is, we're in a crisis of consciousness right now in this country. I think we need to really get to know each other better. I think that will help.
That's that's another webinar on its own. You left the door open for a further conversation, Tafarai. Thank you so much. That was excellent. So thank you, everybody. What I'm going to do is, as we bow out, I am going to ask you if you want to reach out. This is an amazing group that was here today. There's still about 20 people on the call. If you want to connect with other people around the country that are interested in storytelling beyond receiving our email newsletters and being part of what we do, go ahead and let people know here and share your name, who you are, and your email address, and let them know that they can reach out to you and you can connect with each other about storytelling. And of course, we will share with how you can get in touch with Renee, Monica, and Tafarai in our email newsletter. But we want you to start creating your own collaborations as well. So thank you all. Really, this was a fantastic conversation, and more than I could even hope for. Appreciation, and I look forward to connecting with you all again very soon. Thank you. And thank you, Jim. So appreciated.